This is Maharajas of Scale, a podcast where we go behind the scenes and talk to founders who are demolishing the myths around building and scaling a big business in India. These are the stories that have shattered the assumptions around Indian consumers and are changing the game completely. I am Krishna Jonakadla, serial entrepreneur, co-founder of Flit, the fashion locator in town, and startup mentor, bringing you these stories. Hey listeners, this is Krishna. A big drum roll for our 25th episode, which you're about to listen, a small milestone in our podcasting journey. A quick note about the episode before you listen to it though. We were trying to get somebody special for this episode since it was going to be the 25th one. But as luck would have it, serendipitously it turned out to be a terrific episode. Nischal has scaled not one, but two startups to millions of users. And he has shared his growth tactics and strategies and the hacks that he followed extensively in this episode. If you're someone looking for inputs on how to scale your own startup, I recommend sitting down with a pen and paper to listen. There is lots to learn from young Nischal here. You may even have to listen to it a few times to take it all in. Happy listening. Hey listeners, this is Krishna from Maharajas of Scale. Today we have 30 under 30 Forbes entrepreneur Nischal Shetty of WazirX, who's really creating a revolution on the blockchain, in the blockchain and the crypto space in India. I'm expecting this to be one interesting interview. Nischal, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here. Glad to be on the show. I look forward to discussing all the stuff that I've learned in my journey until now.
Wonderful. So tell us about yourself a little bit and what you're working on right now.
Sure. I started off my career as a software engineer and ended up working in a corporate and a startup. Eventually quit my job to start on my own. Built a social media product, scaled it up, raised venture capital, and then moved on to building my current startup, which is WazirX. Again, scaled it up, got acquired. Yeah, we're still running it though.
Interesting. Software engineer in India?
Yeah.
For an Indian company? Okay.
Yeah. So one was a corporate. For about 2 years I worked there. Then I moved to Burp.com, which used to be like it's a restaurant review website.
I know Burp. Predates Zomato.
Yes. This was early days, and then from there I quit to build my own startup.
Very interesting. Burp was I think 15 years old or something.
Yeah, I joined in 2009. Zomato or any such websites were not there. Burp was like the default.
Right.
All of us used to use Burp to search restaurants. That's what I used to use, and so I thought, and it was one of those early startups, so I thought I should join them. I had an amazing, set of colleagues. That's where I actually learned. So that was my entry into the whole startup ecosystem. Before that, in a corporate job, and in 2000, the early 2007-8, it was something like startups was not at the top of my mind. I did not even know a world like that existed till I joined Burp, and that's where the whole my whole outlook towards building companies, how you can scale them, and all started. I guess
it's pretty interesting. As a youngster, you're still young. Way back then, working for a corporate, practically most youngsters today think working for a great corporate as a software engineer, matlab life set ho gaya. Right? But way back then, 2007-8, the financial crisis had happened.
Yeah.
Interesting. What drove you to join Burp?
So I was working for around 2.5 years. I think the biggest problem for me in my corporate job, I loved the job. I got a lot of opportunities, but it was more of a enterprise product where what I built, I never saw anyone using it.
Okay.
And I think that constantly bothered me because I got no feedback. What was I building? Who was I building for? Was I making someone angry or happy? I never got to know about that. And here I was using Burp one of those days for searching a restaurant. And I was like, I didn't know whether Burp was Indian because it was a really beautifully made website. So when I researched, I realized this was in Mumbai, and I used to work in Bangalore back then. So I just sent an email, and I think within a day I got a reply. And they just wanted me to come to Bombay for an interview. I flew down there, spoke to the founders and a couple of team members. I loved the interaction, and I think immediately I got an offer. I decided I should join. So it was more like effortless, though the interviews were difficult. But I think the whole transition just happened when I applied.
Interesting. I wish, I'm just hoping one of our goals in Maharajas of Scale is to enable $100 billion enterprises and entrepreneurs and fire up those dreams. And I'm glad you did that, because it practically everyone forgets seeing the customer. Most of the time when you work in software in large enterprises, you don't even get to work on the whole product. Many times you don't get a sense of what you're impacting. I guess making an impact and entrepreneurship is somewhere part of you. Is your family a business family, or is there entrepreneurship in the family?
Yeah, I mean, my dad was a restaurant India. He used to run restaurants in Mumbai. That's how he came to Mumbai from his hometown very early in life. And I think growing up, I used to see him working on his own, and that definitely was a motivation for me. But here's the thing: I don't think when I graduated, I did not graduate with the whole objective of like I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to build a company. My only goal was I loved software right in college. I just loved creating software. My idea was, can I just keep doing that? And that's why the first 1 or 2 years of the corporate job felt amazing, because I was learning a lot. But I think somewhere down the line, then the realization happened that, all right, I'm building this, I'm learning, but who's benefiting from this? So it was that curiosity that ultimately led me to do everything in my life. I think after that has been about who is it that I'm building this for? And when I see motivation, the motivation is in seeing how people use what you build. That's been the biggest satisfaction for me. And that's why I think more than anything else, if I'm not able to reach more people with what I build, I think that's the point where I'm not happy. So I think that's the only thing that makes me sad, when not enough people are using my product.
Interesting. Inherent in that, I want to build something and then they have to be happy. I think you hit many fundamental truths of building a product, right? Build something that people want. I guess if you know what their pain is, you already have a user persona and the user segment in mind. So it's great to hear that. So how long were you at Burp?
About a year and a half.
Okay.
And so here's the thing. At Burp, when I joined them, and I joined as a software engineer, I started learning how startups function, the whole flat structure, because before that, it was like a hierarchy I came from.
Right.
Out here, I saw the founders, everyone sitting together and working. There's no hierarchy. And so that's where I got introduced to a flat structure. I also saw the speed at which you could go live with a startup versus what used to happen before is a lot of stuff before you even send your software to the client. So speed is something I learned early on in my job. Then eventually, I also started realizing that software is something that you can just build alone and launch it. Prior to that, I always used to think you need an entire team of people, you need a lot of preparation, a lot of money, a lot of stuff to go live. Here I realized that you could actually build something alone in your free time and do it. And that's how I think I took the decision that I'll try to build something on my weekends. And that's where my journey to building my own startup began.
Let's talk about that. So then what happened?
So this was the early days of Twitter. 2007 or 8, I think Twitter, I joined Twitter, 2008, I guess. And I was closely following the Twitter ecosystem, and the Twitter API was launched. So I wanted to just play around with these APIs. And I thought, why not, try to build something that would be useful to me. And one of the problems I faced with my Twitter feed was that I had followed too many people. And my feed was really filled with spam and stuff back then. So I built a simple way for me to unfollow people I did not want to follow. And that became the first version of my product. And I just put it out because, this is again, like we discussed, it was my need to sort of have others use what I built.
Right.
I've never been one that, I want to hide what I built. I want to put it out.
Right.
So I just sent it out. That was not the objective. I just put it out. And it happened to get profile on TechCrunch. And TechCrunch back in 2009, 2010 used to be one of those blogs where if you get featured there, you'll get tens of thousands of people signing up. And that's what exactly happened. So this part-time project got featured on TechCrunch, and within 2 days, I saw about 5,000 to 7,000 signups coming in. And that's when I realized that what I wanted, at least 10,000 more people wanted. That realization happened. But like I said, since this was not built as a startup, I thought to myself, maybe, this is just that initial surge of people that come to a product, and eventually you forget the product and move on, because that's what I've done to a lot of products. Read about it, go sign up, use it, and then forget. But surprisingly, with this product that I built, people kept coming back and kept referring their friends to. So within a few months, the number went to I think 100 or 150,000 signups, all organic, and it reached this place where this was free. The product was free till then, and it was still being built by me in my part time. But it reached a stage where I was not able to pay the server charges. It really got expensive. So I thought, why not try to monetize it a bit, and I put a simple $10 plan as a payment gateway. After you unfollow, let's say 20 people, I think I used to ask you to pay me $10.
Okay.
And it was a one-time payment people had to do. And I think the good, I still remember this, but within a month, I think I made enough money to pay, not only pay my server, but also I realized that it was giving me really good returns.
Okay.
And I continue working on that for another, I think, 3 to 5 months after the monetization as a part-time thing, where it reached a stage where it was paying me more in a month than my salary of my day job for the entire year. So that was the moment where I realized I'm making good enough money. I can now quit and do this full time. So for me, the reason why I'm putting this timeline is because for me it was not like I'm going to quit my job, I'm going to build something, I'm going to make it big. It was more like I'm going to build something because I love building. I put it out, people loved it. I tried to monetize it, people paid for it. I eventually quit my job.
Right.
That was the journey for me in the initial days.
Very interesting. So it was more of a transition that just naturally evolved.
Right. So here, one of the things that I learned early on, and probably this is relevant to this podcast, is while I make it sound like people kept signing up and the number of users just increased, it was not done automatically. I had to put in an effort, and the effort out here is I had decided that if someone's going to use my product, they better talk about it. So what I did is, before this $10 payment that I used to ask them, I also gave them an option to tweet about the product to their friends on Twitter. And because this was on Twitter, I just made it very simple and easy for them to tweet about it. And so most times what happened, people used to first tweet about it, eventually then hit the second paywall where they ultimately pay. But this first one was my growth, I would say the growth hack that I put into the product. So that helped me really rapidly grow. And that's where I learned that one of the best ways for you to grow your product is if you can make your users get you more users. There's nothing better than that, because I was a single developer working part-time, and the growth, by the time I left my job, I think I had signed up 700,000 odd users, all just working part-time, just because I made sure that everyone who uses gets someone else to my product. So yeah, that's how my growth hacking journey started, I guess.
Yeah, I was about to say, unconsciously you had included a growth hack in that.
Right.
Very interesting.
And this was the time where I did not know about growth hack, the term growth hack, or you could really grow products organically, and all these things just happened to me.
Right. Yeah. No, I think growth hack eventually came to be known as those set of things that startups use to create value and then growth for themselves, right? Because there are two ways in which you could build a startup: traditional way, and it's all about discovery. Somebody has to know about your product, because the best product on the planet that nobody discovers still doesn't get traction. So the question is, are you going to raise large chunks of capital and then follow traditional media? Or if you believe you built something really useful, can you get your users to talk about it? The second is where practically every value or valuable startup has really created value for themselves as well as the users, right? Awesome. At what point in time, how many users did you already have when you introduced this growth hack?
Very hard to say, but I think maybe 40,000-50,000 users, because I think it was about 4 months or 5 months after the launch.
Okay.
Oh no, sorry. The growth hack was right in the first week. So I was thinking of monetization. So here's the story about the growth hack. If you remember what I said that I first thought this might just last for a couple of days because of the feature on TechCrunch.
Right.
And people would stop coming. But after 4-5 days, I realized that people still kept coming. But I knew, and this is something I think a lot of entrepreneurs get it wrong, is they go for PR, they get profiled everywhere, and after that the traffic just dies out. And the reason is because you do not capitalize on that traffic.
Right.
Now you should look at PR and your you getting featured on all the media as your bootstrapping of your traffic. But if you do not have a way to increase the velocity of that traffic, then this traffic will trickle down. And like this is the first wave. Can you increase this wave? And within those 4 to 5 days of getting profile, I introduced the growth hack. So that's why even after that, my growth kept increasing. Though I did not do any media reach outs after that. I did not talk to any PR people, asking them to profile about us. Nothing happened after that. It just was users continuously growing.
So the TechCrunch itself was a reach out, or did TechCrunch just discover you guys?
No, that was a reach. I just sent an email saying, hey, I built this. Can you try this out? Just surprisingly, it got profile.
Interesting. And Crowdfire, I see that it still exists, and then you continued with Crowdfire for quite some time.
Yeah. So after this, and when I had launched this, the name of this product was Just Unfollow, because that's all it did. It just helped you unfollow. So I launched it as Just Unfollow. But after quitting my job and getting serious about the startup, looking at the growth, I realized that I could not convert it into a large company by just one feature. I need to build a set of features. And the name at that point was one of the things that I believe would limit my growth for the startup. So I rebranded it to Crowdfire with the objective that we would help people grow organically on all the social networks, not just Twitter. We introduced Telegram after that. So the way this happened is, I think after quitting, I focused on the growth aspect, and we could increase the number of users from about 700, 800K when I quit to maybe 6 or 7 million users by the time it was 2015. So about 2 to 3 years into quitting my job, I could scale this up from about 10x in 2 to 3 years organically. Again, no funding, bootstrap. And by this time, we had reached about $1 million in revenue. We were a small team of 7 to 8 people. Now, this part is again very interesting. How did we scale it from 700K to 7 million users organically? So my early learning was you could capitalize on your user base, you could grow it. That helped. The other learning I think I got is try to write on the platforms that exist. And along with Twitter, around the same time, new platforms like Instagram and Facebook's APIs, everything started cropping up. So we expanded into these platforms. We put in growth hacks into these platforms as well. The same kind of thing where you can either tweet about it to get some limits increased and stuff. So that helped us a lot. We also realized that while this, hitting a pay, hitting a limit on a product, you would tweet it. But there's also something else that people would love to do. People love to talk about your product if they love it. But the biggest thing that prevents them is if you do not make it easy for that to happen. And you will see this in a lot of products when you use them. Some products make it so simple, so easy for you to tell your friends about it. And some products just don't care about it, where you might have to just, somehow copy the URL. Then you realize, what do I tell them? I don't have anything to tell them. And there's this whole inertia then that develops and you don't go ahead. So we made it really simple. We just put a very small button at the top of our website saying, tell everyone about it or tweet about this. And without any incentives, people started clicking this and sharing it. So we realized that, you don't always need because I started with a pay, like a wall in between saying, no, you have to tweet about this, then you get to use more of it, to going to a place where I realized you just need to make a good product and make it easy for people to talk about it. And that helped us grow even further. During this time, this is something I don't talk much about, but I think for your podcast, I came up with a strategy which I realized why would people talk about your product, and we call this as the ETC strategy. So E stands for ego, T stands for temptation, and C for curiosity. The thing is, either you do something where it allows your users to brag about something. I'll give you an example of this is ego playing into growth hacking. One of the best examples is your Gmail. I don't know if you remember, but when they launched, they had an invite-only model. And this was one of those first early invite-only models.
Right.
Where if you wanted access, you had to find a friend who would give it. And that was a perfect example of ego, because whoever had it used to show off saying, I have few invites for Gmail. If anybody wants it, you can come to me. And that played beautifully in making Gmail viral, because though Gmail was innovative, it was one of those, I would say, the last email products to come out. Email was already saturated. Everyone was happy with what they were using. So how do you think Gmail really went off? Is this whole ego aspect of people everywhere. It became exclusive as a product. So I think that's something that plays really well in getting people to talk about it. The second is temptation. I think temptation is what I started with, where you said, if you want to use more, speak about it. That's a good example. The third is curiosity. Now, curiosity again comes from, I'll give you an example of curiosity that has played well for us is since the feature was about unfollowing, we used to show you, let's say if you had 50 people who did not follow you, we used to show you 10 people and then say to view the rest of the people, you can tweet about it. This gave maximum clicks on the share button, because people just want to know, whether they want to unfollow or not. They just want to know who's not following. And that worked very well. I've seen this in LinkedIn, where LinkedIn tells you to, now they charge for it, but they tell you 20 people viewed your profile. They send you an email. There's always a maximum clicks will be on that email, because you just want to go and see who's visited your profile. It's something that a lot of products have used. So these three things, ego, temptation, and curiosity, if you start thinking properly in the right direction on how to bake that into your product, I believe that you'll have a really viral element into your whole journey of the startup.
Yeah, extremely well said. In fact, I think this sort of thinking represents a new way of doing business, isn't it? Because in the past, products were all about themselves, while they were about the users. But the way in which those products were actually distributed or even talked about were not really to some. Well, I take that back. I think this goes into a level of understanding of the user, what drives the user, how can you get them interested, and it is fascinating to see all of this happen. And I think you represent that newer set of entrepreneurs. We will come back to your journey in a bit. I think this is not very widely followed in the Indian ecosystem. There are a handful of startups that do this, but not extensively. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's getting better now, a lot more. But yes, I think this is something that is lesser in India compared to the rest of the world. At least in the Valley, this is something that is practiced more, I guess.
Right.
If you were to compare that versus here. But I think it's a matter of time before entrepreneurs learn all of these things and start adapting. Right now, I think there's the other part of growth is when capital is cheap, you exploit that. And the last 10 years, I think capital has been cheap. But there will come a time where capital will not be cheap. And maybe this time that we are going through might result in that. And that is where I think these organic growth hacks become all the more important. But I think the other aspect is in India, if we were to spread this, I would say, especially for first-time entrepreneurs who don't usually have access to capital, these kind of strategies become very, very crucial to take them off the ground. Because as now I've learned as a second-time founder, third-time, it's so easier to get access to capital. But first-time founders always have it difficult. So if they start implementing these growth hacks with a good product, I think it'll help them grow faster.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So let's come back to that journey then. So 700,000 users and then 7 million. That's and how many of them were paying users?
I think back then we had reached about $1 million in yearly revenue. It was still a very small number because our goal was more than revenue, was to become like a large consumer product.
Right.
Because most of our users used to be all the influencers on social networks. So, anyone with a large following, they've used us over time. Verified people, actors, actresses, gig workers, podcasters, YouTubers, everyone you name it was using Crowdfire back then. So we were focusing more on growth, but I'm sure we had tens of thousands of paid customers back then. But the idea was, can we now grow this further? And I kept focusing only on the growth of the users. So we ended up raising capital because we did not want to limit our growth, which meant we do not want to put unnecessary, pay gates in between. And just monetize like the top 1% of users who wanted, maybe only the power users to begin. And that's why we raised our first round of $2.5 million from Kalari Capital. And from there, 2015 to 2017, we scaled it up to about 15 million users. We doubled the number of users and tripled our revenue to about $3 million by 20 2017. So that was like the second phase. Here, what we did is we started scaling up our company. One of the things is we started building more into the product, and we also started doing all the traditional marketing stuff, SEO, and all the low-hanging fruit that we never tried, because until this point, to reach 7 million users, it was just 7 people. So it was more of product-related growth hacks and stuff. But we also realized that after a point, you also need to do all the traditional marketing that exists, because there's a lot of growth potential there too. It's just that those marketings it's more harder, takes more manpower, more time and patience, which is probably doable once you raise capital. So we did the traditional route after that.
Okay. And then how long did you continue with Crowdfire as the only venture?
Yeah, so in 2017, what happened is all these platforms, Twitter, Instagram and all, they started changing their API terms and policies. And for us, we had to then move and pivot Crowdfire into a SaaS model with a monthly payment and stuff, and focus on businesses, take it more B2B. We could not easily service the consumers because most of what consumers wanted, which was organic growth, Twitter, Instagram, everyone started stopping people from achieving that because of the business model that these platforms have, which is to help you grow, they will charge you. So this led me to the whole decentralized ecosystem, because I realized I was building my product on top of platforms which did help me scale, but at the same time they had the power to change the rules of the game midway, and you can't do anything but to comply. And that's not something that I was really happy about when it eventually happened. So I looked around and I saw this whole decentralized ecosystem where no one can come to you and say, hey, this is not how you do things. You have to change the way you do it, or you can't do this and that. You are free to build what you want in the way you want and use whatever products you need on whatever platforms that exist, which is, blockchain. So I decided that we need to build something in the decentralized space. And with a bunch of few people from the team, we started looking into what do we build in this ecosystem. And incidentally, during this time in 2017, the Bitcoin boom happened. And a ton of people around the world, including India, started buying Bitcoin in large numbers, including me and my co-founders and my colleagues. And we realized that the way it used to... So here's the thing. In 2017, when Bitcoin was booming, in India, if you wanted to buy your first Bitcoin, it might take anywhere from, let's say, 2-3 days to a week, because you need to sign up. Then there's this KYC. Then banking was all manual. You had to transfer, wait for them to, give you the credit, and then you finally buy. And the rate at which Bitcoin was growing, by the time you finally get to buy Bitcoin, I think the prices had doubled. So that was the situation in the country. And we said we could build something simpler, easier, and we could ensure that people can buy their first Bitcoin as soon as possible, maybe within half an hour or 1 hour. And with that intention, we launched WazirX, our second product.
So Crowdfire, you were the only founder. Did you have another team? But you were the only founder.
No, I had co-founders, 2 of them,
okay,
who joined me at various stages. So one of them joined me early on, the other joined me after a year, I guess. But all of us were early into that. I started it alone, yes.
Okay. And then the same co-founding team became the co-founders of WazirX as well?
Yes, since we've been building and we all wanted to do something else as well. So a part of the team, including my co-founders, we decided we would build WazirX. And a part of the team who were on Crowdfire, they continued to build Crowdfire. And even today, they run it well. It's a good SaaS business, which is working out well. And they love building it, so they're doing it. I think my love is more in the consumer-ish side of things. So I've been focusing on Wazir.
Interesting. So before we talk about WazirX, let's discuss another aspect. Investors, unless your current venture has achieved spectacular outcomes or some sort of an exit, investors really frown upon, the founder working on a second product. Because you had outside capital, you had Kalari. Did you face anything of that sort before you started WazirX, or how did that happen?
See, the thing is, I agree that focus is very important, but it's also very situational. When you have good investors who understand situations and want to help you navigate it, I don't think that's much of a problem. So for us, we were lucky to not be too worried about it. We got all support we wanted. And that's where I think when you raise money, it's very, very important to look at who you raise from, and how can they help you, and have they. I'm biased more towards just having to work with people who've seen companies growing or also not growing. I think if they've seen both of those, then they understand there are decisions to be made at times, and those can be hard decisions. So for us, it worked out well, I guess.
Okay, so let's talk about the beginnings. WazirX, it is one thing to be part of a wave, because there's always this angle of a wave, isn't it? For most startups, you're either ahead of it or you're in the thick of things. So I guess 2017, when you started, the crypto frenzy was catching up practically all over. Did that give you a huge boost when you launched WazirX?
So WazirX is a very interesting journey when you talk about the wave. When we announced it, the boom was still in progress. And by the time we launched, the bear markets had come in where the prices had crashed. So I'll just run you through this whole transition or the period. This was a period of 3 months. We announced in January 2018 that we would launch WazirX, and we eventually launched it in March 2018, about 2.5 months after the announcement. So when we announced, there was this bull market. Bitcoin prices were reaching the peak, and I announced it, and immediately it caught on amongst people where it went viral. So how did it go viral? This is, I think, another one of my learnings. So what we did is we did not want to launch a full-blown product and only then talk about it, because the market already had a ton of exchanges in India, crypto exchanges, though not very great, but they existed. There was an option. It was not like we were the first ones to market. So what we decided is, if we are not the first ones to market, we should first at least test the waters, at least understand there is a need. So we just built a way for people to pre-sign up, where you could just register with our product, and we posted it out, and I spoke about it on my Twitter feed and my Facebook page, and I realized people just wanted to register on it. There's a reason for that. I'll come to that. But within a week, we saw about 40,000 pre-sign up. And that's crazy, because I think it's a financial product. Within a week, getting 40,000 signups, that's crazy. And I'll tell you why that happened. With WazirX, we became the first exchange in India to also launch our own cryptocurrency called WRX. And the idea was, we will give away a certain percentage of our tokens to our early adopters. That was something that I decided we should do it early on, that we should keep a portion of our tokens for our early adopters. So when I launched, I announced that the early adopters are going to get X number of tokens when they sign up. And this went viral. People started talking about this to their friends. Why did they tell their friends? Because we also gave you extra tokens if you shared it with your friends. Again, all of this is learnings from my previous startup, how I scaled it up, using the ETC strategy: ego, temptation, and curiosity. So this just worked. It was amazing. We saw 40,000 signups in the first week. The product's not launched; it's just a registration page. So we said, there's definitely demand. This is definitely going to work. Let's start building it. And we started building the rest of the product. From here, and the signups just kept increasing. By the time we launched, I think we had crossed 100,000 users. But from this Jan when we launched to the when we announced to March when we launched, the market had changed. The bull market had converted into a crash. And when we launched, eventually, we realized that while so many people signed up, but I think a very small percentage of that users came to use the product. So while we had 100,000 sign up, if I'm not wrong, maybe just under 1,000 people used it on day one. And that was demotivating time in a way, because you do really well, the markets don't work according to the growth you expect, and then you're left with a smaller market now. But here's where I think in a normal circumstance you would just give up after you sign up 100,000 users, and if only 1,000 people come on day one of those, you would probably just give up on a product. But for us, one of the things that we've always focused on is mission. And our mission, the reason what we spoke about before, is the reason we built it is because the products back then were not up to the mark, and we realized that we are deep believers of decentralization. I always talk about it. I think Indians should participate, and that's what was the biggest motivation for us to even start WazirX. So we said, even if the market's gone down, this is not what we are in for, not for today and for a few days, but for the long term. So let's focus on our mission. What's our mission? Our mission is to ensure we can make crypto accessible to everyone in India. So what we do is we keep building, and we continue building. Within a few weeks, the banking ban was announced, and while that seems like an even worse thing to happen, I think we saw that as an opportunity, because we were new and we had nothing to lose. We could pivot really quickly. So while the other exchanges, the top exchanges in the country, because of this banking ban, were thinking of shutting down, we were thinking, how do you navigate this uncertainty of regulation and provide something to the users so that they can still continue to be involved in crypto? And that's where we ended up building our peer-to-peer way for people to buy and sell cryptocurrency. So and that gave us the actual boost where people started coming in, and they came in thousands every day, and it grew really quick from there for us.
So the peer-to-peer was India only, or it was global?
It was India only because of the banking ban. So here's a bit of a background. The ban was not a ban. The RBI said none of the banks under the RBI can work with any of the crypto-related businesses or crypto activities. So what that meant was we could not have a bank account to accept deposits or process withdrawals for people. So what we did is we said, that's fine. We can act like an escrow for the crypto. We will hold the crypto in our escrow. You guys can, the seller and the buyer can transfer the money between each other's bank account directly, and then we would release the crypto to the buyer if the buyer made a payment to seller's bank account. So this worked out very well for us, and it spread really fast in India, and everyone started using WazirX then.
Interesting. And talk about that journey. So from under 1,000 users, how did the numbers started climbing?
So when we launched this P2P, because it was very innovative in the space, people started sharing about it everywhere. And I think quickly we went to, we tripled, or I think more than tripled within a month, the number of people who are using us every day. And eventually, I can't reveal our active numbers now, but we have, it's in tens of thousands of daily active users today. But I think the thing is, when I look at this, it's not just the P2P part, just that you build that and you launch it and people will use it. And this is another thing which sounds easy, innovate and they'll come.
Right.
But I think one of the things I learned here also was, and this is all on hindsight, is you need to innovate, but you also need to make enough noise about that innovation.
Right.
So the thing is, what we did, if we had only innovated and if we were just sitting on our laptops and waiting for people to come, that would not have happened. What I did was I started talking about it everywhere, because there was a problem that existed, which is there was no banking access for crypto businesses. I started making sure that I spoke to everyone about the solution we had, media, our users, everyone, and I made sure they spoke about this with their friends and families everywhere. So I think that gave us a big boost, the awareness that there was a solution. And this is very different from the marketing that we had done before that. This was not just putting into the product, but this was more of brute forcing your way into success, I guess, by constantly talking about it. So it was not like an overnight increase in users. It was a gradual increase in users over time because of the noise we started making about the solution we had.
I see. So how did the Binance acquisition happen?
Yeah. So one thing before that is, while we had this solution, the other important thing that I did is, again, this is coming from the mission of making crypto accessible to everyone, is I started a campaign called India Wants Crypto. And this I started in October 2018, with the objective that I'll tweet about crypto and spread the right information every day, at least one tweet about it with the hashtag India wants crypto. And I started tagging our prime minister and our finance minister, because it was just surprising that you have a banking ban on a very new technology in the country when the rest of the world is innovating on that. So I started tweeting about it every day. My intention was, will I get heard? Can I represent the industry or something? But what happened beautifully around that, which I've never expected, is that the entire ecosystem started rallying behind it. And people started talking about this campaign, sharing this campaign, retweeting. And that, gained a lot of awareness about crypto. And, the ecosystem started recognizing us as a brand which was trustworthy and important in the sector. So that's the other aspect that unknowingly, I think I built something that helped our company. But the intention was to spread the right information about crypto and help the situation that was there, which is something, this is again, it comes on, if you are mission driven, not everything can you look at it from a lens of how do I grow my product, my company, my stuff. You can also look at how do I help the industry, the country, the sector. And if you take initiatives there, it helps you in branding yourself in the right way. This was, I think, probably one of my biggest learnings in the whole world of branding. And see, if you think about it, your growth, everything, it's never a 0 or a 1. Like, you just do this and you'll grow. It's always a combination of all of these factors where branding plays a very, very important role. Branding brings in trust. Trust brings in people to recommend you to their friends, especially true in a financial product. Because I would, if, let's say I'm friends with you, I might read 100 articles talking about product X, and you tell me that, initial, you should just use product Y because it's amazing and I trust them. I will just go and use product Y. And this comes from the branding that you can create in the market for yourself, which usually is by picking up real causes that you believe in that sector. And for us, this was a cause that we could pick up. And that gave us a really good, I would say, learning in terms of branding and how do you take your name and company forward, but in the right way, by just thinking about the ecosystem rather than your own, internal company stuff and all. So yeah, so these things happened, and we kept growing. And then eventually in 2019, I started. So the Binance acquisition was not like a, where I set out to say, let's sell this company or something, because I was really motivated in growing the crypto ecosystem in India, growing, the awareness about crypto. So I was looking for funds, and because of the banking ban, the problem was that traditional VCs were not interested in investing in the Indian crypto ecosystem. Now they're just opening up, but not back then. In last year, in 2019, they were not, because of the banking ban. So I reached out to a few companies, including Binance, and I told them how I want to continue growing this, because I believe in the sector and I believe that India will eventually allow crypto businesses, because it's tech and it's innovation. India is going to be part of it. So while talking to them, I realized that our mission was very similar. They wanted to ensure that crypto is accessible to everyone around the world. I wanted to do it for India. So those talks of capital and all moved towards, why not just be together and work? Because Binance, I could learn a lot from them. They could provide whatever help needed. And I realized that if I wanted to grow, I could grow faster with them. So here too, my objective was, can I grow faster? When I was thinking of raising money, it was the same. Can I raise capital so that I can grow faster? Which meant, talking to Binance, realized even better than raising money was to go with a company that has scaled itself really fast. I mean, in 2 years, they've crossed $1 billion in revenue, and they've done this all bootstrapped in a way as a company. They did have an ICO, but there's no traditional fundraise. So I thought, why not join them? And that's how the actual acquisition happened. And I think that was a really good decision, because we got acquired in November 2019. It's been about, I think, 6 to 7 months now. And we've grown 10 times in terms of our trading volume, number of, active users, everything. I think whatever we can think of, it's 10x for us. And that's been because I've been able to, two events. One is the banking ban was lifted. That was one major event. The second is I've been able to sort of expedite the whole growth by learning from a company that has done it better than me at a tremendous scale. So a lot of new learnings came to. which I could not have done organically, I guess. So that was the the last 6 months for us was the next phase of growth by learning from someone who's done it way better than, like 10 times or 100 times better than.
So how are the volumes and the users right now? I think they're in the hundreds of millions, and then the similar hundreds of thousands in terms of the users.
Yeah. So we, in terms of volume, we do over $100 million a month, and in terms of users, we have, I think, over 600K, I guess, over 600K right now.
Okay, awesome. Let's talk about working with a larger company. I will come back to, or rather, we'll touch upon the blockchain and crypto need in India in a minute. But when you get acquired, are you now completely owned by Binance, or do you still own a stake in the company?
So we are acquired by Binance, and but the way we function is like an independent brand for them.
Right.
The way, let's say, how your WhatsApp or Instagram functions, it's a completely separate team. I run it, but yeah, we are now a part of the Binance brand.
Okay. So how is it in a large company? You have complete latitude and freedom to implement the agenda. How does that work?
Yeah, so I think I can only speak for Binance. I think this is a very different company in terms of the base structure. It's completely decentralized. And when I say that, it's like the decision-making powers are right at whoever is running the show. Like, for example, in our case, I'm the guy who takes all the decisions. I don't have to go back and forth on these things. All I have to do is probably set goals, and then I'm the one responsible for them, and I go after it. But the good thing is that because it's a large company, there's so much of learning and knowledge that I can immediately get help with. I want to connect to anyone in the ecosystem, I get connections. I want to understand how a particular thing is done, they've done it. So I just have to talk to them. When I say it's anyone from my team. But things that used to probably before take us a week to figure things out, or a week or two, now we can do it with one discussion with someone who's already done it in Binance, because they've seen it before we've even experienced. So the rapid education and application helps you grow faster, as against, let's say, what we were doing before, where it was you encounter a problem and then you try to do a lot of research, learn, implement 2-3 things, and then you come to a solution. That has expedited for us, and that helps a lot in growth.
Right. So let's touch upon the crypto in India. I'm an ardent believer that not just crypto, in general, I have this philosophy that for a nation of our size, for the kind of minds that we have and the genius of our people, practically in everything we seem to be behind the curve. There is some sort of a scared mindset. We are constantly, it's 70 years past independence. We keep saying we are a poor country, we don't have money to do this, we don't have money to do that, we should not be dreaming about these things. But I fundamentally see, notwithstanding what McAfee said that on one of his tweets that a bunch of Indians actually invented Bitcoin, I fundamentally see there are very few things on the planet where there is an opportunity for wealth transfer between nations, right? Colonization, when the Asian economies, India and China accounted for more than 50% of global GDP, the colonization wave actually literally was significant, perhaps the largest organized wealth transfer process, that cycle that happened in the world. All conquests by one king or the other was in some sense both political dominion as well as dominion over economy. But in India, we continue to be behind the curve. We keep saying we can't do this. But I think for the minds that we have, cryptocurrency represents a genuine chance for us to be ahead of the curve, adopt it. I see this as another opportunity like IT services, where we caught on early and we started having our own enterprises, and then we fell behind the curve. We were early in that. We pioneered the offshoring wave, but unfortunately, I have my own opinion that because all of these enterprises were run out of here as opposed to the market in which they were in, we failed to capitalize on the early lead that we did. that we had as a country. But with crypto, with so many Indians being global and so many of this, it is a genuine opportunity also for us to be ahead of the curve. I can understand the government's reluctance, because whoever controls the money controls the guns, and vice versa historically. So I don't think in any time soon we are going to have any government that is going to give up control of money, and that's also partially, or maybe 80% of the reason why they don't want cryptocurrencies to happen. But I do believe we genuinely have an opportunity to dominate that, notwithstanding the fact that I think over 60-70% of Bitcoin is controlled by China. So what are your thoughts about it?
See, I think I'm a big believer of this being an opportunity and an equal opportunity for countries around the world to be ahead of the curve in terms of tech. And these opportunities don't arise every few years. You get them once a decade. Like you rightly said, we got the IT services wave correct, but then we got a lot of other waves wrong. Before that we missed the manufacturing wave. We've also missed I would say the product wave, where now we have companies which are trying. Eventually we will probably catch on, but you realize how difficult it is if you do not catch on. Don't get the country in the right timing, it gets really hard to capture the market after that. And in crypto, unfortunately, what has happened the last 2.5 years of the banking ban has actually almost destroyed the ecosystem that was built before that by the early people in crypto and blockchain. And now it's just so hard. We're still trying. We're trying to spread the right information. We're trying to get more and more people to start up in the crypto space, and we are beginning to see that happen. But yeah, we still have an opportunity, I believe, that because it's still the early days of crypto. Think of crypto as like the 1992 of the internet. Everyone's still building infrastructure, and if we can get in right now, we can participate in the infrastructure building stage. In the internet, what we lost out was the infrastructure stage, which is why if you look at all the infrastructure companies of the internet today, it's not really Indian companies. But in crypto, if Indian startups get in now, we have a couple of them, but that's just it. But if we can get in enough companies building infrastructure for the decentralized world, 5 to 10 years from now, we would have a stake in the infrastructure of this whole decentralized ecosystem. Now, what you were talking about, like governments being afraid about, let's say, the money part and all, that's probably a part of it is true. But I think the biggest fear comes from the misunderstanding of what crypto is, what blockchain is, and that misunderstanding is something that I'm trying to, do away with in our country. The biggest misunderstanding is that with crypto there is anonymity, and hence there is ease of using crypto for illegal act. And the funny part is the solution to that is being suggested as a ban. But what we need to understand is crypto is a technology that is built such that it's resistant to a ban, which means what is going to happen is that the good people who want to innovate will adhere to a ban because they don't want to do anything illegal. But at the same time, you are still not stop the very illegal activities that you want to stop, because your suggestion to stop illegal activities was to put a ban, which makes all the good activities illegal by default. So the good guys are not going to do it, but the bad guys are not going to stop just because there's a ban in a country. That's the part which actually comes in, because there's a lack of understanding of what to do. And the solution is something, if you look around in the US and Japan, UK, is regulation. Because when you regulate, what happens is you're then ensuring that the right way to do this is to get the liquidity into your sort of your white market. There's no black market after that, because all the good players create liquidity for crypto in a more KYC adherence, and all of these happen. So what all activities are happening in the white market, and then the black markets will never have liquidity because no one needs to go to the black markets after that. But if you ban it, what happens is good players are out. So then you're just giving rise to liquidity for the black markets. And so the worst thing that a country can do is actually to ban crypto and give rise to an underground economy that they can never figure out, and help increase the liquidity in that underground economy. The best thing that a country can do, which is what US and everyone is doing, is to regulate so that you control the liquidity and you see where the liquidity is. You have KYC and all the laws applied, and you make sure that no one goes out of this transparent system that you help create. which is why I'm pushing so much for regulation, because the misinformation leads to thinking that crypto is going to be a bad thing. Let's ban it. But that's actually aiding all the nefarious activities, not getting rid of.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, it represents a fundamental shift in governance, because historically the Indian state has always reacted to practically anything and everything with a ban. Whether it is drugs or a book. Let's take one of our infamous bans, Salman Rushdie's Satanic Verses. There is enough psychological research to actually prove that once you ban something, even those that are not interested in it actually get interested in it. Right? Like you're saying, it gives more liquidity to the black market. India has a huge Hawala market. Perhaps we are the fountainhead of the Hawala market globally. And Indian government has this fetish because, the ban is easy, right? It takes one diktat, and Indian government is playing God practically almost all the time with everything that it touches. So it just bans. But the fundamental truth of that they don't understand is that, like you rightly said, as soon as you ban it, it goes underground, which means you have zero visibility whatsoever, because it doesn't go through the usual, all the channels that you are. It is just like traffic. Let's say today we ban traffic. People have to get to work. They're going to use, all sorts of underground routes. Perhaps, I don't know what that will look like. But as soon as that happens, that means people are going to use unofficial routes, which means your own control over it, your own visibility into it actually doesn't happen. So therefore, your chances, in fact, the ban is counterproductive because you're less in control at that point in time because you have no visibility into it. So I totally agree with you. But I also think in some sense, the US is employing in some sense some double standards. On the one hand, they say they want it. There is, there are all sorts of attorney generals that go after crypto. I still think it's early days. It's a technology that is not yet understood. It is perhaps a knee-jerk reaction because governments don't like things that they can't control and they can't get visibility into, right?
Yeah, I think even in India, if you look at it, even in India, what is happening is, I don't believe there is going to be a ban. And while a lot of comparisons can be made, but look at crypto. Crypto is a new technology, that's all. And, any technology can be misused and also used for the right things. There is no such technology which cannot be misused. But that does not mean that we do not adopt that technology, because the thing is, even if one country does not adopt it, the rest of the world is going to adopt it. Like if you wanted to, even if you had banned the internet, the only bad thing that would have come out is we would have, as a country, lost out on learnings and a lot of information that we get today. The communication that happens on the internet, we would not have had this. We would not have had amazing companies coming out of India. And eventually, because you will have to join the internet, and that is what always happens.
Right.
It's very similar in the decentralized and the crypto world, that even if we ban it, the problem is that after a point we'll have to open it up again because the rest of the world is not going to stop for India. And if that happens, then we have lost out on that opportunity to be early movers. And then we just become like the back offices of the world again.
Right.
And we will never be able to get out of this whole services thing,
Right.
I think we need products, we need innovation to go to the next level as a country as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, if you see the basic premise of blockchain, which is about trust and about really increasing the degree of transparency, everywhere you see in India, take property matters for example. In fact, I remember going to this blockchain conference a couple of years ago in Hyderabad. Amitabh Kant, who was the CEO of Niti Aayog at that point in time, had some really startling numbers to share. 83% of cases in the Indian judicial system are all related to property disputes. And if you see blockchain, property is one single matter that can be so beautifully addressed with blockchain. And then you just start building on top of it wherever there is need for trust, and there is a lot of need for that in multiple places in India, where central actors are either so powerful to actually damage the ecosystem, or there is no central actor per se. Let's take, for example, traffic. Traffic is so badly regulated, and there is nothing that is put in place to regulate Of course, the constraint in terms of infrastructure is one angle. There are so few roads and there's so much traffic. That's another angle too. So everywhere you see it, from issuing driver's licenses to the frauds that happen in education, where students come up with fake degrees, everywhere you see it, blockchain can literally transform. But the adoption of it would obviously give a run for the existing stakeholders, right? The vested interests that benefit from it obviously do not like to see that happen. And when you extend that to crypto, it becomes beautiful. Now blockchain is widely adopted. If all of that is tokenized from one industry after another, a lot of transformation can happen. But that story is sort of similar across multiple sectors in India.
Yeah, see, I think the thing is, you cannot stop innovation. It's going to happen one way or the other.
Yeah.
So I think what we can do as entrepreneurs is to keep building and keep innovating. The rest of the things we'll have to just learn how to navigate it. And that's how even we look at it at WazirX. We have to navigate the regulatory environment, but we have to keep innovating, because I think if as a country we have to grow, we have to focus on what we can contribute. And I think as startups, we should all focus on innovation. That will help us grow rapidly as a country as well, I guess.
Absolutely. So where is WazirX headed next few years?
The idea is to continue growing the whole awareness and understanding of crypto and blockchain, because clearly there's a lot of misconceptions and stuff, and the best way to do that is to present the right products for people to use, which is what we're doing. So we'll continue making access easier for people into the crypto world by making our product simpler and more easy and efficient for people to use it. That's the goal. I want people to be able to buy their first Bitcoin within maybe 60 seconds. There are some barriers to that which we are working on. We'll get there.
Yeah, I think that's another impediment to implementation, because cryptocurrency and blockchain is right now shrouded under so much tech stuff. The common man does not really understand a lot of it. I think we are yet to have that moment. I have a metaphor, for instance, until the movie Bahubali was made, there was no belief that films that were made on such large budgets and on such bigger ideas, the story may not have been very nuanced, but it was in some sense a beachhead that proved that there could be very large global cinema, and more importantly, it could come out of the South, right? So every technology, everything needs its moment. If it was Google and eBay and some of those for the early days of the internet, and then Facebook and Twitter and a lot of them for Web 2.0, and then you had the new financial fintech revolution. The best is yet to come. I think we have only scratched the surface of crypto. A lot of it is yet to unfold.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very new industry, and the opportunities in front of us are immense. And that's something why I keep encouraging all entrepreneurs to at least look at this sector and figure out if you can build solutions, because this is like the early days, so it's not saturated. You can think of so many ideas and build for this ecosystem, right?
Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and when I look at it, I can't realize that 1 hour has passed by. It was awesome to listen and hear what you did with Crowdfire and what you're doing at WazirX. I'm an ardent believer in the spirit of the Indian people, our resilience, our ability to rise above ourselves and all the impediments that most of it is self-inflicted. I hope we get this crypto revolution right. I hope we get this blockchain revolution right. And I think yours will be a story that will be right at the edge to emulate and then follow, both in terms of what you're doing for the community. We want we want crypto community, as well as what you're doing with WazirX. I'm certain you'll scale greater heights. Maharajas of Scale will come back to you when you reach another pinnacle, another summit. And then, let's see what that vantage point looks like from there. Any thoughts before we close out?
Thanks a lot for having me on the show. And I think it was amazing to discuss the journey. Gives me a lot of more perspective in this whole talk for myself to take away from. And I think, the way you're surfacing stories of growth, this is very, very important to build out the ecosystem to help more entrepreneurs. And I think as entrepreneurs are eventual goal is always that others can learn from our successes and the mistakes, and maybe do it better and faster than us. So I think you're able to achieve that in this podcast, and that's amazing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nischal. Thanks for being very candid and also discussing what you did in great amount of detail. I can definitely tell this will be one of our best episodes for entrepreneurs to pick up right there, especially the ETC model that you shared, the growth hacks that you shared. When I usually listen to a podcast, I have my ear glued and I usually have a pen and paper ready to make notes in terms of things that the founders might have done to put their own startup onto a growth trajectory. And I know this will rank up there in one of those. And it's a gift that will keep giving, because entrepreneurs, I'm sure, will keep coming back to this episode and say, oh, Nischal did that. And then look at what he showed us with the ETC framework. We should go do something of that sort. So that is fabulous.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Nischal. And we wish you the very best.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the story. If this story made a difference to you, tell us by leaving a comment on the website or our social media channels. Help us spread the love by subscribing, liking, and sharing our show. We welcome speaker suggestions and collaborations. Write to me at nida@maharajasofscale.com.